So the next part of the training is on weights and measures activity entry. And in the weights and measures world, things are a little bit different than the ag world in that rather than targeting daily summaries of activities, we are in fact entering every single activity as a separate inspection. So in that sense, it's very much like the PUE program where each PUE inspection is entered separately. That's what we're looking to do in the weights and measures module. So to get things set up to do that, just like in CalCATS, we have a bunch of reference data that comes in from our CalAg permit system about our growers and our applicators and our licensed personnel and so forth. We need to establish that basis data for our weights and measures program. And that basis data consists of what are the business locations that are operating in your county and what kinds of devices or inspections do they have? So before we jump into the weights and measures menu, I'm going to skip over one and go to businesses and locations. And we'll talk about how businesses are established. So we have a two-level hierarchy in our businesses and locations. The businesses that I refer to here are the owners of the operating locations in Humboldt County. So for example, Food for Less is owned by, actually, who owns Food for Less? I'm not sure. They're Kroger. I think Kroger Corporation owns them. The reason why we do this is typically when you send invoices for device registration, those invoices go to some corporate headquarters. But once the invoice is paid and you need to send out the certificate, that usually gets mailed to the location. So as you can imagine, we need good mailing addresses and physical addresses for all of your operating locations. And the next logical step is, well, if you've got a bunch of stores that have the same mailing address, if the mailing address changes and you have to go update it on all the stores, that's just a recipe for data to get out of sync and for data to be incorrect. So instead of that, we extract the business owner information into a separate record, and we have a hierarchy. So what do I mean by that? And if I take a look at our list of businesses in our test county here, we have Chevron Corporation, presumably they're going to own a bunch of gas stations. Safeway, right now you'll see they have 4 locations, so 4 Safeway locations. And then the Kroger company has 3 locations in our San Joaquin test county. Now, the data that we imported for you all was not originally set up like that. So we did our best to extract common mailing addresses and set them up so that you can update the mailing address in one place and only one place. So let's take a look at this Safeway record. Now over to the right, you're going to see some new icons, right? We've seen the pencil before. That means view or edit if you have permissions. Trash can means delete. And this little icon is what is usually used on a map to indicate a location. So as you can imagine, if I click on there, I'm going to drill down to see these 4 locations. Clicking the edit button shows me the data we track on businesses. Now on a business, everything on this form is optional. None of it's required except for a business name. And the name has to be unique. So we have lots of drop-down lists where you pick businesses and locations, and in order to differentiate them, we do require unique names. You see we have a spot for physical address and a spot for mailing address. We don't really care what the physical address of the corporate headquarters is. What we really want on this form is the mailing address, because that's the mailing address we're going to use to send device registration invoices to. And then below that, we have some contact information and then a description and some county notes. So really very thin, typical contact database for the business owners. Just remember, on the business owner, that's where we want the mailing address. And Paul, to answer one of your questions, when we imported your locations, we put the physical address on the location and the mailing address on the associated business owner. A little bit more about that when I look at the location data. So let's drill down to those 4 Safeways. So if I click on the locations button, we'll see here are the 4 Safeways that they operate in my test county. Now, take a look at the data that's collected for a location. It's very similar to the business information. We have a physical address, we have a mailing address, we have some contact information. But up at the top, the first thing we'll see is what business does this location belong to? And we have a change owner button. Now, the relationship between a business and its quote unquote owner can be kind of complicated and represents a lot of different cases. The simplest case is, in this case, like Safeway is owned by a corporate headquarters that, this says Pleasanton, California, but maybe they're in Dallas, Texas, or somewhere else. And the main reason for us having this record is to maintain a single mailing address for all the Safeway stores, so we don't have to update them all every time that mailing address changes. We just update it in one place, and then all the invoices go to the right spot. There is a second case, which is pretty common, where a bunch of stores are owned by a certain business, but they don't take care of the bills. They use, I forget what they call them, like a business docent, some bill pay service that pays all their bills for them. And so the quote unquote owner, instead of being Safeway Corporation, might be Billy Bob's Really Good Bill Paying Service. Okay, and again, that Billy Bob's Really Good Bill Paying Service may pay the bills for a couple of dozen locations around the county. But that's who we would put in this owner record, obviously with some notes that, this is not the corporate owner, this is the bill pay service. But again, with the purpose being to maintain a single mailing address for all these different separate locations. Then there's another model which is common, which is the franchise model, where you may have a bunch of Chevron stations with their, I forget what their little market is called, but every one of them is individually owned by a franchisee, and there is no Chevron that pays the bills at a corporate level. In which case, when you create the location, you'll check a box that says owner same as location. And it'll create that owner record and maintain the mailing address there for you. So just be aware of that relationship. What we're looking for is on the location record, the physical address. And on the associated business record, that's where we pull the mailing address for invoicing. So more on that Wednesday when we get into the invoicing module and we see how to configure those. But just one last comment on mailing addresses. And that is, in a typical corporate ownership scenario, the local store itself will definitely have a physical address. You need to know the physical address to be able to go there and do inspections. They may also have a mailing address, which might be a local PO box. And that's not uncommon. So the location itself may have a mailing address, but that local mailing address is frequently not where the bills go. So yeah, there's really some complexity that can be represented here. Okay, so beyond the standard contact information that we track for the location, then we get into classifying the location. Okay, because eventually you're going to want to be able to pick out locations by, say, their location type or by a district assignment. So we have districts, and these are self-generated. So you will generate the districts that you'll use, and you'll maintain those, and you can assign districts to the location. A location can be in multiple districts. You'll see, for example, here I've got one list of districts, District 1 and 2 for devices, and a different list of districts for price verification. Not uncommon. You might have a separate list of districts for LPG. And that all comes down to how you manage your workload and how you split up the county to divvy it up amongst your weights and measures inspectors to manage their workload. Same idea for business types. This particular grocery store is a grocery store and a gas station. Again, you have an unlimited number of options as to how you represent this. You could put in 2 separate locations for the grocery store and the gas station. You can put them into one location and assign both business types to it. But the business type is really a useful way of divvying up businesses, particularly when it comes to generating reports, metrics reports, and statistics reports that aren't necessarily part of what you deliver to DMS. Everything we're talking about right now is for weights and measures, but we did mention during our ag data entry that it is possible to enter individual daily activity summaries by location. So if you want to use this location as an ag location, you can check this box as well. Then we have what's called a zone. This is designed to be geographic. So if you send us a map that shows geographic zones in your county, then, and by a map, I mean an electronic shapefile, something that we can get into our GIS system. Then once we know the longitude and latitude of the location, we'll automatically assign it a zone based on where it fits on that map. We have an account numbering system, and this, is something that we can automate. We can customize for you. The default is to number it according to the business sequence number and then the location within that business. So these Safeways are going to be 1-001, 1-002, etc. Then we keep a longitude and latitude, or we'll show you a map. We do have a map viewer that shows you the location of all your locations. That's a mouthful. But as you're entering new locations, once you enter the address, you can use the find on Google to try and locate that using Google Maps geocoder. So you'll see I clicked on find on Google. It looked up the address and found these coordinates. And if I want to check them, I can click this little button here, and in a new tab, it'll open up Google Maps and show me that location, which I can then zoom into and verify that, yep, that's the Safeway store. So it's a neat way of assigning the coordinates, and then I can say, yes, use those coordinates, and it'll copy those down onto this record. So, like I said, when we import your data in bulk from your old system, we will run this automatically. But for those locations that we couldn't find, and for any new locations that you add, you have a quick find on Google button here. After that, we have a series of items that are really placeholders for future functionality. And that involves information about this location as an ag location. The only one that we're using right now is under ag license type. We have nursery licenses that are used for some counties that have big nursery programs to track their individual nursery inspections. Skipping past the ag stuff, back to weights and measures, we have cab number, license plate, and cab VIN number. Typically, counties will represent a cab company as a single business record and then a different location record for each cab, which lets you invoice separately for each cab and keep track of the inspections at each cab. And to make those searchable, you can enter any combination of these three fields about the individual cabs, and then you can search for them using that information. And then at the very bottom, this is what I've been talking about where the invoices and certificates go. So by default, typically, the invoice to location is not checked because we generally send invoices to the business owner. And then certificate to location is usually checked because normally we send the certificate directly to the physical location because they got to, frame it and put it up on the wall. Okay, so a lot more detailed information we track about the location itself. And as I said, we will have imported as much of that as we can from your existing system. But to be honest with you, most counties do experience some need to do some cleanup on that during the first few months that they're using CalCATS. So to drill down to the next step, if I take that Safeway and I want to know, okay, what kind of devices and inspections do we do at that Safeway? And the last icon you'll see here is the scales, which indicates a device. And when I click on there, we'll see all the devices / inspections that we do at that location. what we see here is we have retail motor fuel meters, and they have 8 of them. They've got LPG truck meters. They have 5 LPG trucks. They got 5 counter scales, 12 computing scales, etc. Okay, the screen is going to say device type, and throughout CalCATS we use the term device type, but it's not always a device, right? So what's PV10 plus? That's in the quantity control program, that's price verification. So not really a device, although, if it's a scanner, they certainly have devices, but it could be, just a price lookup system of some kind. Packers, don't know if you have any big packing houses. Some of the big counties like Riverside track and bill for locations that do a lot of packaging. And then we also track Weighmaster, either certifications or audits, and petroleum audits, which are, this is not the pumps, this is the pricing and signage and so forth. And then on this screen, we'll see some data about recent inspections. So if we have a recent inspection, how many devices were inspected, and when is the next inspection due at this location for that device type? Now, with inspection due, these are not regulatory deadlines or anything like that. What DMS says is for most device types, you have to inspect them once a year. If they're submeters, you have to, inspect a lot of them every 10 years. For petroleum audits, I think you have to do those every 4 years. So the next inspection is a placeholder that lets you spread those inspections out over the course of the year. And you can use that, however you like. So you might decide you want to do all of your District 1 inspections in the first quarter and District 2 in the second quarter, or, we've imported as much as we can these next inspection dates based on the last inspection date from your current data, and then incremented them using that 12-month or 120-month or 48-month period as appropriate. Okay, so that's everything that's going on at this Safeway. The last part we'll see here, this screen is special. It has 2 drill downs, right? So there's a little cart that says view individual devices. And then it has the clipboard, which is view inspections. So eventually we're going to go look at the inspection history and start entering inspections for this location. But before we start doing inspections, there's one sort of top level thing in CalCATS that is an option for how you track inspection results. And we'll take these counter scales as an example. By default, if I don't do anything, when I go to enter an inspection, it's just going to ask me how many of them had passed and how many of them failed. But it's not going to ask me specifically, counter scale number 1, did it pass or fail? Counter scale number 2, did it pass or fail? Now I can choose to switch that, and I can choose to enter those inspection results device by device. To make it easier to do that, we have this view individual devices screen. Okay, so I can go in a priori and say, all right, we've got 5 devices here. So add 5 rows in here for me, please, right? So add 5. And it's going to give me 5 blank rows to record manufacturer, model, serial number, and location. So the most useful for the inspector is where in the store is this device? Right? So now when an inspector goes to do counter scale inspections at the Safeway store, they're going to see left, right, center, front, and back scales. And when they test them, they can enter the results for each one of them individually. It's really helpful if one of them fails and you get the place and service call and someone shows up to do the reinspection, they'll already know which device it is and what part of the store they should go looking for it to get that red tag off. In addition to that, you can also track manufacturer, model, and serial number. This is a lot of data to collect. And fortunately or unfortunately, the biggest candidate for tracking this data are submeters. And the reason for that is a lot of counties are finding submeters that are failed on a test are just being shipped off and reappearing in another county that maybe doesn't, test submeters as rigorously or whatever. But that, unfortunately, that means you've got like 200 of them you have to enter manufacturer, model, and serial number for. if you find yourself in that boat and you don't like having to, click on 200 rows here, which is not all that user-friendly, I admit, you can use these two buttons down here to spit this screen out to Microsoft Excel, fill in all your data in Microsoft Excel, and then import it back here to fill out this screen with all the data you updated in Excel, which makes it, marginally easier to complete that data entry without having to use this little pop-up web form. Okay, so keep in mind, yeah, we decided we're going to track each 5 of these counter scales separately. So when I go to do the counter scale inspection, we'll see how those results get entered individually. First, though, let's jump into these retail motor fuel meters. They got 8 pumps, and I'm going to go look at the inspection history. Now, in my test system, I don't have a lot of inspection history. So, if we do, we'll see the inspection reason, how many inspections were performed, how many passed, how many failed. But I'm going to jump right into a new inspection form, and then we'll see what the history record looks like for it. So when I click on new inspection, and a word about these inspections, we are in CalCATS tracking the inspection results, not the actual conduct of the inspection. So as you know, if you're in weights and measures, when you go to do several of these inspections, particularly like package audits or sub-meter inspections or LPG meter inspections, there is a lot of stuff that you do and information that you collect about the test results that let you determine if it's a pass or a fail. At this point, we don't collect that level of detail in CalCATS. We just want to know the results in terms of pass and fail. Now, on the inspection form, all the inspection forms look fairly similar. The header part up here, as well as the inspection definition, then skipping down to remarks, violations, and acknowledgement, those sections are identical for every kind of inspection. This middle part, which are the inspection results, that changes depending on whether you're doing a device inspection or a price verification inspection or a weighmaster audit. Okay, so we'll take a look at a few of the different form types to give you a feel for how that works. That's just like in the ag program when you do a pest detection daily summary versus a nursery daily summary. The top part of the form is the same. The bottom part of the form is different. Same deal here. So let's inspect what we see here. The first thing we see the location, its physical address, what device we're inspecting, how many devices they have, and what is the current next inspection due, right? So this inspection is due July 1st. And then if there has been a routine inspection before, which initially you're not going to have any, but next year you'll have this year's routine inspections to look back on. It will tell you what the remarks were from the last inspector. And that's really useful for inspectors when they go out to a device. If it's not the same person doing the inspection as last time, they'll see those last inspection remarks here. And then also, what was the date of the most recent routine inspection? So the last time they had a routine inspection was September of last year. Now, below that, we get the inspection definition. This definition just means what kind of inspection is this? And we'll see we have a date time. This is required. We've got to have the date. The time is optional. You're not required to record the inspection time. And if you do, it's up to you as to whether you record the start time or the end time of the inspection. The next thing we see is the inspection reason, and this one's very important. There's a lot of automated calculations and tracking, cross-referencing that happen in the background here. So let's start with routine, right? That's the one you do every year. And when you do a routine inspection, as you can imagine, the goal is to reset the next inspection due date. So what we see pop up in this area, oops, didn't mean to search. What we see pop up in this area is the inspection interval for this device type. Again, all devices are 12 months except submeters, which are 120 months, but that's configurable by your county. So if that ever changed, you would be able to change that, and the system would automatically pick up what this typical inspection interval is. And then it calculates out the next inspection due date. And you'll see that it applied that 12 months to the current inspection due date, not to today's date. That's an option. On your county preferences screen, you can tell the system whether you want this next date to be 12 months from what it is currently due, or 12 months from when I do the inspection. Either way, this next inspection due is editable by the inspector. So, I could change that. Because again, this is just, you have to get the inspection done at some point during the year, but exactly what time during the year you're going to get it done, that's, just up to you. Okay, so what if it's not a routine inspection? Let's say we had a device fail on a previous inspection, and I'm going out to do the place and service call. In that case, I'm going to pick re-inspection, and instead of asking me about next inspection due date, it's going to ask me, pick the inspection where the device failed. And the reason I want to know that is so that I can cross-reference the two and show that the place and service call was received and that the re-inspection was done, and whether or not the service agent correctly repaired the device, right? Because it may fail again upon re-inspection. Which leads to the next component, which is, are we going to charge a re-inspection fee for this re-inspection? And to my knowledge, there's no standard policy amongst counties as to how many times the device fails before you start charging to go back out and re-inspect it. But if you decide that you are going to charge to re-inspect it, you'll check this box. And that will tie into the revenue system, which we're going to be discussing on Wednesday, to generate a re-inspection invoice for this location for this re-inspection. Okay, a third important kind of inspection is a complaint inspection. We do have a complaint form, which we'll take a look at in a bit. But if you fill out a complaint form for a location and you've identified the device type that's registered at that location, the system will automatically configure an inspection due. It's more like a, just a note on the calendar that sometime within the next 60 days, you should go out and perform this inspection. So if I'm going to fulfill one of those and do a complaint inspection, now the system wants to know what's the complaint number that you're responding to. And of course, it'll filter it to this location and this device type for you. Why do we want to know that? Well, again, because we want to cross-reference the two and be able to say, for complaints that are received, which ones have had an inspection done and what were the results of that inspection. Now, there's two other inspection types, survey and other. Survey is used primarily for multi-county investigations or inspections done for data collection purposes that aren't part of they're not going to reset anything. It's not going to reset the inspection due date. It's not in response to a complaint, etc. So if I pick survey, there's no other information that's requested in that box. And then other is exactly the same. The only distinction is typically counties are using other when you have an inspector trainee that's riding along with an inspector and needs somewhere to enter their time. So they'll enter other here and they won't enter any inspection results. They'll just track their hours. But by doing that, instead of using routine, they avoid double resetting the inspection due date. Okay, so inspection reasons, very, very important component of what we're going to collect on the form. Beyond that, we always have boxes for recording number of consumer complaints or other complaints, even if it's not a complaint inspection. Needs follow-up if a device fails, then you will have to say needs follow-up yes, and set a follow-up date. I'll talk more about that when we actually record some inspection results. And then in the top right, we will assign an inspection number, a notice of violation number, if there's a violation. This is optional. There's a configuration screen where you tell the system whether we want it to generate numbers. And the reason for that is some counties are still using pre-printed inspection forms with inspection violation notice numbers on them. If you're doing that, then you don't need the system to generate numbers for you. But if you don't want to do that, if you want to use our printed inspection report as your inspection certificate, then you can have it generate inspection numbers and NOV numbers, very similar to the way we do in CalCATS. Okay, and then if there are devices that have failed, then you will need to indicate the number of violations, and they can either be owner violations, which is on the left, or service agent violations on the right. You can enter 0 for violations. There can be a failed device with no violations. That's certainly, the case if it's not a mismeasurement or a misweight, then you generally not necessarily gonna have a violation on it. And then some very, very simple enforcement related tracking. Did you send a NOPA? And if so, what was the fine severity that was issued? We don't do anything with this data yet, but in the works. I have plans to expand on this enforcement related tracking for CalCATS and for the weights and measures module. And lastly, in the inspection header is number of miles, if you're tracking miles on inspections. All right, skipping over the inspection results, I'm going to skip down to the next common part, which is remarks. There's always a remarks box here. These print on the inspection certificate. And then below that, violations. So if there are violations on this inspection, you'll enter them down here. We're going to enter some results and then actually go enter some violations to show you how it works. And then the very bottom part is the acknowledgement part. So who at the store acknowledged the inspection, who the inspector is, and then these areas down here are, you can draw on them with a mouse, or if you have an iPad and you're out in the field, you got a data connection, you're running CalCATS on your iPad, these work on a touchscreen where you can do your signatures using the touchscreen. So let's go to the middle part. This is the part that changes depending on what kind of inspection you're doing. And in this case, I have not listed out all 8 of these pumps individually. So I'm just going to enter the results in summary form. Now, within the inspection results, we got a matrix here. The top part of the matrix is pretty self-evident: number passed and number failed. We do expand on the number failed. We want to know if they failed over, which is in favor of the owner, failed under, which is in favor of the consumer, or failed other. And other is, the readability of the display, or readability of the printed receipt, or whatnot. Failures of some component of the type specification that don't relate to the outcome of the weight or the measurement. And then as far as rows go, we have these 4 rows. Initial is when you're doing a routine inspection and it's not a new device, you enter your results under initial. If it's a new device that has never been sealed before, then you'll enter the results under new install. If you are out doing a routine inspection and they happen to have a red tag device that you're placing in service, you can do that without entering a whole new inspection form for it. Just put the results in your reinspection row. And then lastly is other, which, anything that doesn't fit the above categories. But the most typical use of other is when you have a device that fails and then the owner repairs it while you're there. And, owner repairs are pretty limited, but if there was a raisin stuck under the fruit counter scale and the owner removes it and then you reseal it or retest it and it passes, then you can put a pass under other for owner repaired. So let's do a very simple inspection. There are 8 fuel pumps. I tested 8 of them, 7 of them passed, and 1 of them failed over. And that took me 4.5 hours. Okay, so let's save that. Now, this is going to give me some validation messages up here in the top right. And the messages that you expect: if there's a failed device, I need to set a follow-up date, right? So I've red tagged the pump, and I'm going to set a follow-up date. The follow-up date defaults to 30 days from the date of the inspection, although you can configure a different number of days by device type. If you have certain service agents that are hard to find, and for certain kinds of devices, it's going to take 3 months. You can schedule your place in service call expected date out further. The other thing is, if there's a failure of any kind, I need to enter how many violations there were. And in this case, I'm going to say there was 1 device owner violation. Shouldn't be an SA violation since this was just an initial inspection. And then because I entered a violation, I'm going to want to add a violation narrative down here in the violations section. So I'll click on add violation, and there are three bodies of law that I can, or three codes that I can reference. There's a business and professions code, California Code of Regulations, and then you may have a county ordinance that specifies the requirements for that device. If it's a B&P code, we have a searchable database of the most common B&P code sections. So I can search for fuel. And if it's the code section I want is there, I can reference it here. It gives basically the code reference and then the code section title. Now, even though I have a searchable list, if I don't find the one I want, I can type in a new one ad hoc. Okay, so I'm not restricted to just what we have in the database right now because, you know, it's hard to keep up a regulatory database as regulations change. Conversely, I might have a pre-CCR reference. We do not have a searchable database of this. So you'll have to type in your code section in your title here. And then you have county ordinance. This one, if you send us a spreadsheet with your county ordinance chat or section numbers and section titles, we'll import it for you and it will be searchable. By default, you'll have to, you know, provide, you know, type it in just like you would for any other ad hoc code section. You can select more than one here. It's only going to print one of them on the notice of violation form. So if you have multiple code sections to reference, I recommend you enter them as separate violation rows. And in the remarks, just put, you know, reference and then reference. You only put the violation narrative in one of them. Okay, so for each violation that I'm going to reference, I'll add my violation narratives. And then I'm good to go on saving the record. And in addition, I can now generate a inspection certificate for this inspection. We have two ways of generating the certificate. The easiest and most convenient is the certificate PDF. So this is going to generate a PDF file that has the, let's blow this up a little. The header, which prints on every page, because there are 2 pages here, includes the details about the owner, the location, the date, the inspection type, and the acknowledgement row. So that prints on every page. And then below that, we have the device results. How many in compliance, how many out of compliance, how many other, and how many total inspections were performed. Be aware, if I am at, say, a grocery store and I inspect their computing scales, their counter scales, and their hanging scales all on the same day, I can print this inspection certificate just once, and it will include all 3 of those inspection device type results in the same form. We also see the fuel return to storage section here. I didn't cover that on the inspection form, but for any device type that maps to retail motor fuel, whether you call it retail motor fuel meter or high volume motor fuel meter or whatever it's called, that will have a return fuel section where you can specify the fuel type and the amount returned to storage. 23 is a bit heavy, 2 gallons. Okay. Again, once you've added that, it will print that out on the inspection report as well. And then we switch to a second page for the notice of violation. And you'll see that, you know, I have the option turned on to generate unique inspection numbers. So the inspection number is in the header to make sure that, you know, the 2 pages stay together. And then the violation notice number prints on the second page for the notice of violation. And here we have each reference that we made along with the violation description. So The one limitation we have in generating this PDF is I'm not able to expand these remarks boxes to fit all the available text. So you will run into situations where you want to provide more violation description text than will fit on the 4 rows that we have here. If that's the case, don't despair. You can also generate that as an Excel file. And by generating it as an Excel file, I get 2 things that I can do, 2 benefits. The report itself is here, and you can print it directly, and it will just print exactly what we saw on that PDF. But if my narrative is too long, I can manually adjust this row height and then print it. And then you'll see I have much more room for my remarks. So that's the main reason you might opt to go to Excel for a certain inspection report rather than the pre-generated PDF. The other is you get some more detail in here. So you get some additional tabs that give you the data that's gone into generating this inspection report. So in this case, if you had 3 different device types that were inspected on the same day and they're all showing up in the report, they would all show up here under all inspection results, and you can see them separated out. Okay, going to take a quick pause for breath and see. I don't see anything in the chat, but if anyone has questions about the overall structure of a weights and measures inspection, fire away. Okay, so question on how you track miscellaneous time for weights and measures, and let's head back to the time card and I will show you exactly how you do that. So in the weights and measures program, historically, almost all by any measure of the time that shows up on your weights and measures program goes into these inspection forms. But there are lots of things that you will do where you can't really bill them on an inspection form. So how do I put time into the weights and measures program without using an inspection form? So first thing we'll do is I had 4.5 hours of weights and measures inspection on June 24th. Let's go back to my timesheet and just verify that on June 24th, the system magically added 4.5 hours to my weights and measures activity row, which it did. And just like with the ag activities, if I want to see what that 4.5 hours was, I can double click on it and it will list all the weights and measures inspections I did on that day. And just like with the ag activity, if I want to open up that inspection and look at the details, I can just click on the pencil icon, and in a new browser tab, it will give me that inspection form. So if I need to record some time on weights and measures, then I can use these direct and indirect time categories. Now, Paul and I are going to have a separate conversation as to whether yours will say, professional support direct, or if it'll say weights and measures support time. But whatever it says, when you pop into that report, you can add time. Well, I've got to do a quick configuration adjustment here. Professional support direct, I'm going to add weights and measures. I'm going to make subprogram required, device type optional. And reporting type is direct. Okay, that's how easy it is to reconfigure CalCATS. So now when I go into professional support direct, I have weights and measures as an option. And then to drill down even further, I will pick a subprogram. So I was working on measuring devices. And I can optionally go down even further and say I was working specifically on retail motor fuel meters. And I can put 2 hours in here. Okay. Then to give you another example, let me go to tomorrow and say, in this case, I was working on weights and measures, but I was Let's go do one more quick configuration update. That is, for direct support, I want to make subprogram optional. So in this case, tomorrow, I'm going to do some hours in the weights and measures program, but I'm not going to pick a subprogram. I'm just going to say, it's just general weights and measures time. Okay, so that's two totally different ways of recording non-inspection weights and measures time. I can do it very specifically and say I was working on retail motor fuel meters, working on the type specification, or, cleaning the provers or whatever I was doing there. Or I can go general. I can say I was working on weights and measures and I want to spread that time or allocate that time across everything in the weights and measures program. So again, I don't know, starting next week, if you're going to see professional support direct or weights and measures support, or what that time category will be named, but that's how you would record those two different kinds of indirect time. Okay, so back to our weights and measures inspections. I'm going to go do another inspection at that Safeway location. Now, there's a couple of different ways I can do that. The way I most commonly do it is I go under business locations, I go to the location device type screen, and I use this search box. This is like the Google search of CalCATS. So I can start typing in Safeway, right? Or I can type in the account number, right? Since I know the account number, that's really useful if you're, got an invoice in your hand or something that has the account number printed on it. I can search by address, right? Lodi, I've got Food for Less and Safeway. I can search by all kinds of things in here. If I was looking for a cab, this is where I would search for the VIN number or the cab number, or I can just search by name. So I like that search box. That's a really easy way for me to find things, and then I can drill down into whatever device type I'm going to go into next. On the other hand, I can use my new activity button, right? So if I'm on time card and I want to enter a new inspection, I don't have to switch screens or anything. I can just say view all activities and click on new weights and measures inspection. And then here I get my Google search again, right? So this is Safeway. These are all the Safeways. These are all the device types they have. And I can start a new inspection just by picking, all right, Safeway 0387 counter scales. Hit start new inspection. That'll fire up a new inspection form for me. And then the third way is I can add weights and measures inspections to my favorites, and then it'll show up under my weights and measures menu, just like my favorite ag activities showed up under my ag activities menu. But let's go do a counter scale inspection at this Safeway. Form's the same, nothing really new. You don't see a return fuel section on here, obviously, for counter scales. Let's do a routine inspection. And instead of entering the summary level, right, we have 5 devices. Now remember, I listed out these devices and I said where they were in the store. So I want to enter the inspection results for each device individually. So I click this button, enter in individual devices, and now it's going to show me left, right, center, front, and back. These are the 5 scales that I identified: model, manufacturer, and serial number. And I can enter results for each one. So for each one, I will say, what's the inspection type? It's initial, and then did it pass or fail, over, under, or other? Okay, so initial, passed, initial, failed, over, initial, passed, and then this last one I didn't do an inspection on. It was the end of the day and I had to leave, so I didn't get to this back scale. Now, as I've entered these results here, you can see it's filled out my summary table for me: 3 pass, 1 fail. Then I can add my hours, and away I go. Now, I know it's going to require a follow-up date, and I'm going to say, actually, this one failed other. It was just a problem with the customer visible readout, and so there were no violations. and there we go. I've entered a second set of inspection results for that store. And as promised, if I go look at the inspection certificate, we'll see both devices are listed on the same form. Okay, while I'm in here now, I'm out of the store and I don't have model manufacturer and serial number. I can actually fill out this information and update domain and business record, with model numbers and serial numbers, et cetera, while I'm out in the field. So I don't need to wait and come back to the office to do that. The one thing that is critical to remember, though, is if I change the number of devices here, if I add a new device, and this was a new install and it passed, right? We now know that this store has 6 scales. If I go back to our location listing, I'll save that. When I go back to our location listing, it's not going to update oh, sorry, it is going to update if I do it that way. Let me do a computing scale inspection to illustrate what I'm looking at here. If I update this through the summary form, right? So I'm doing a computing scale inspection. It's a routine inspection. They have 12 devices, 12 passed, and I had 1 new install. Guess I should probably put in some hours here. So, when I added the device in the devices row, it updated the total number of scales at that location. If I just update it in the summary here, we don't do that. So if I go back to this Safeway, we still only have 12 devices. Now I'll see the incongruity here because I have 13 inspected and only 12 registered. And the reason for that is that if we're only entering summary level information, there's a lot of ways that number 12 maybe shouldn't be updated. And I don't know, I can't interpret from the inspection results whether that's really a new device or what's going on. So just be aware that when inspectors come back from the field, if they are telling you there's a new device, you may have to go to the location device type record and update this 12 using the pencil icon here. This number of 13 is critical because when we come to generate the device registration invoice for this location, this number of devices is the number that's going to be used for charging the registration and admin fees. Okay, let's take a look at another inspection type or two. Let's look at price verification inspections. First question, though, is do you, other than complaints, do you have a PV ordinance? Do you do price verification regular inspections? I think the answer is no. Okay. So that's a lot of counties don't have a scanner ordinance, and so they don't do annual inspections on all scanner locations or price verification locations. So I'll go briefly through that form, just so you're aware of how to use it when you need to. With price verification, the top part of the form and the bottom part of the form are identical to the device inspection form. But in the inspection results, what we're looking for is a listing of all the incorrectly charged items. So this section down here is where you're going to spend most of your time. So if I go in and they sold me a can of beans, it was advertised for $2.99. The regular price is $3.99, and they charged me $3.49, right? So it's a 50-cent overcharge. And then they had 24 of them on the shelf. So down here, for everything that's incorrectly priced in my price verification inspection, I need to list each one of them individually. Then for the rest of it, let's say I was doing a 15-item inspection here, I would say there are 14 items that were correctly charged. So that's where I go back up to the summary table and I say there were 14 non-sale items that were part of my test, and they were charged correctly for a total of $34.58. I didn't pick up any sale items or priced correctly. And then down here, there are two options in your configuration as to this receipt subtotal. An option that's used by a lot of counties is for it to automatically calculate this. So your receipt subtotal before tax should be this number, right? The total of actual items charged. So it should be 38.07. I can type. And then your total error on the receipt is 50 cents, and I'll put in my tax of $3.45 and 2 hours, and away you go. My inspection is complete. You'll see that as I enter these numbers, it's calculating and it's rating the pass and fail category based on the percent overcharge and the percent of overcharges. So that's that in a nutshell there. It's pretty simple. You can opt to not have this number entered automatically. What I found is that there are occasions where I look at the receipt and I manually add up all the items on the receipt, and they don't add up to the subtotal. And that's because the store owner is sneaking in a sneaky little 10 cents or something in there, hoping that nobody's going to bother actually adding up all the individual items. So, there could be an additional error here where they charge me 38.17 instead of 38.07. And now my total error rate is something different. But be that as it may be, you can set this to automatically calculate and save yourself the effort of adding all those numbers up. I have violation here, so I'm gonna have to set a follow-up date and number of violations, which I will set to 0 for simplicity. And then we'll just take a quick look at the inspection certificate. It's similar to the device inspection certificate, but obviously in this case, it's generating the standard price verification inspection results form. Okay, to continue our adventure, you can see I set up every possible combination of device types here, so I'd like to look at a couple more. There will be occasions, I don't know how frequently, but there are other QC inspections, right? We have two kinds of QC inspection form. We have package audits and package tests. For whatever reason, there's actually 5 different QC inspection forms other than price verification. And we've combined 3 of them onto the package audit form. That's package audits, package inspections, and labeling actions. Right, so these are actually 3 different inspection types, but since they're frequently done together, you can fill out all the information, even if you've done all 3 of those inspection types on one form. The system is smart enough when it's counting up your QC inspections to count these as 3 separate inspections, one location. So that's if you do that kind of package inspection work. The other QC inspection type is called package tests, and that has the test purchase form and the bulk commodities form on it. Those are used much less frequently, so I don't have an example of those here for the training, but they operate the same way as you would expect all the other forms to operate. And then the last 2 that are pretty common are petroleum and weighmaster. The petroleum form is, again, not retail motor fuel meters. It's not a device inspection. It's a pricing and signage and quality inspection. So that operates a little differently. And then finally, we have a weighmaster inspection form, which is for either test weighs or for the weighmaster certification audits.